Hello, and welcome back to the quarantine zone. Assuming you're still in quarantine, that is. Hopefully it won't take me that long to make this video. Anywho, last time you saw me, I was making some apocalyptic props. I made a gas mask and I modified a toy shotgun that I had. And now it's time to paint those apocalyptic props to make them look the part. I took them out to my dad's shop and sprayed everything that was plastic with some automotive primer and sprayed everything that was foam with some Plastidip, which is a rubber-based sealer, basically a primer for foam. For the gun, I sprayed everything that needed to be wood with some brown spray paint, and everything that needed to be metal with some black spray paint. I also very lightly dusted the black with some more of the gray primer to try and make it look a little gunmetal-y, but I went way too heavy-handed with the primer, so I dusted it with some black, and then I dusted it with some primer, and then I dusted it with some black again. I don't mind the way it looks as a base coat, but it just didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to. Also, word to the wise, if you're using paper towels to help mask off a large section of your prop, wait until the paint is absolutely dry. Otherwise, you'll get little bits of paper towel stuck to the paint job. Yeah. I don't think it's too big of a deal. I should be able to sand it off somehow. Maybe that's a benefit of putting so many layers of paint on it. I should be able to sand it down and not damage it too much. Hopefully. If not, I'll just paint it again. But I really cannot have any paper towels stuck to my gun. That won't look good. Maybe if I can't get all of it off, I can paint it to look like rust. It is supposed to be somewhat apocalyptic, so I guess hiding your crimes, I suppose. While I was out there, I also primed the mask section of the mask. I wanted this to look like, well, I guess I don't know if it would be made out of metal in real life. Well, it could be. I wanted this to be rigid, basically, while I wanted this part to look like rubber. So I'm going to leave it as just the Plastidip, which is why I have it covered up so that I can paint this however I want to paint it when I get there. First, I'm going to concentrate on the shotgun because I think it'll take longer, and specifically the wood for the same reason. There are a lot of details in wood that need to be painted. I had previously made this little handheld shotgun pistol. It's kind of what I think of it as. It's not too great. There's some pretty bad seams there, but it was like one of my first props that I made, so I think it worked out fairly well. I was pretty happy with how the wooden handle turned out. I thought it looked like wood. But then when I showed it to my family, my mom's first reaction was, wow, that looks just like real leather. So at least it looks real, I guess. Okay, so for the gun stock, first thing I'm gonna do is to just try and replicate some sort of grain pattern. I'm gonna have various different types of browns and just paint them on in stripes. I wasn't too happy with how this color turned out, but it looks wood-ish, so I'd rather use it than waste more trying to get it perfect. Plus, it'll most likely be covered up anyway. So after the first couple of stripes, it started to look a little bit more like camo than wood, and I started to feel like maybe I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing. So I decided I need more structure in the form of painting on dark spots and stripes to have more guidelines of where to put the grain. This started out decently, but I felt like I went a little heavy-handed with it. So I mixed up a darker reddish brown that was watered down and mixed with Mod Podge. And then I covered it with that to try and even it out a little more. But here's the thing. Sometimes when I don't quite have the right color I need, but I'm using a lot of paint as is, I'll go ahead and paint some of what I have onto a scrap so that when I add different colors to it, it'll take more effect because there's less paint to mix in with it. I did that with this piece of paper here, and I actually ended up really liking the way that looks. And now I want to try and to incorporate something like that into this. And I think I have a plan of how to do that. I kind of damp brushed on some lighter, kind of sandy shades. Wasn't exactly dry brushing, but close enough. I also realized that I could stick these two pieces together, and then that'll make the brush strokes line up. And now I'm going to replicate this dark but diluted reddish brown and try to put it on there. And hopefully, if I do it right, the brush strokes should end up sort of looking like this, but with that sandy color shining through. Let's see if it works. So after I put on a few layers and stripes of that more watered down brown, then I did a dark wash. This basically consisted of getting a watered down blackish brown and trying to work it into all of the cracks and crevices of the textured plastic. This was harder than I was expecting. Whenever I tried to wipe it off of the main part, it either stuck too much or was wiped off entirely, not even leaving anything in the grain. I was trying to think if there were different materials I could use to wipe it off. I tried to use a paper towel at first, then I tried my fingers, then I tried a rag that had kind of a texture I liked. I thought maybe I could just use that. But in the end, I decided I need something completely flat that would scrape the paint off of the raised parts but leave it in the lower parts. So I took a few strips of cardstock and used that to scrape off the paint. This worked surprisingly well. I'll have to remember this in case there are other times that I have fine details that I want to bring out with a dark wash. This really did rub the black into the cracks without staining the entire thing. But it still did leave a little bit of a dark residue on everything, so I dry brushed on a slightly lighter orange type of brown. And I did this with a very dry brush. That was important. I didn't want this to cover everything else up. I just wanted to make the raised parts of the wood texture a little more noticeable. So yeah, that looks pretty good. I think it turned out a little bit darker than I was planning, but it's not unrealistic. I covered it in some sealer to protect the paint job, and that did make it look a little bit plasticky, but real gun stocks would have some sort of varnish on them, so the shiny isn't too bad. I may do a little more dry brushing just to, if I feel like the shininess is too much, but I'm satisfied for now. So I'm doing things in sections, and with the wood done, I'm going to move on to the gas mask. And the first thing I'm going to do is paint the mask kind of a military green, sorta. Probably have it look kind of faded and metallic, but that's the idea that I'm going for. Hi. So, after I painted on the base layer of the military green, I decided to go ahead and unmask the Plastidip. And it was a good thing that I went ahead and did that now, rather than waiting till it was mostly done, because apparently the masking tape was stickier than I anticipated, because that just tore the Plastidip right off, especially on this under chin. here. Up above, they're like, it stretched this area but didn't tear it. Then there's like a little chunk taken out there. This chin is just... It even tore through the ridge seal that I made. This... I didn't think masking tape was that strong. I wanted this thing to be fairly beat up and old, but not this beat up and old. I guess I'll just have to re-plastidip it and then not mask it afterwards. I might actually put some Mod Podge around some of these torn parts just to try and, I guess, put some primer for the primer, like see if that strengthens it a little bit. Hopefully this won't happen again. So after my plastidip disaster, I decided to switch over to some cheaper masking tape that didn't have quite as much stick to it. And just to be doubly sure, I stuck all of the pieces of tape to my clothes first, so that they would lose even more of that adhesiveness. That seemed to work, and I didn't have any more accidents with the masking, which means I was able to reapply the plastidip and continue painting. While I was doing stuff with the plastidip, I actually went ahead and let it spatter some of the edges of the green. I wanted it to look a little weathered, and the picture I was going off of looked sort of like it was once a shinier green, but it kind of had like darker splotches growing around the edges, so I thought spattering some plastidip around the edges would help lay that foundation. Somewhere around here I also painted the filters and rings black. I'm planning on weathering them a little more later. Speaking of weathering, I use that plastidip spatter foundation and start to darken the edges of the green. After this, I do a dark-ish wash. I use a green that's a little lighter than the black speckles, but a little darker than the regular green, and I really kind of scrub it in there and wipe off the excess. This, I was hoping, would give the whole thing kind of a slightly dirtier look while blurring the lines between the dark and the light. I also put some kind of greasy streaks and stains around some of the crevices. As well as some rust and scratches around some of the cracks. There were a couple of places that I dinged it with the Dremel while trying to fix the seams, and I decided to lean into that, purposefully making some nicks and scratches around the nose. One of the pictures that I was sort of basing this off of did have some more prominent scratches, so that's kind of what I was taking inspiration from. I painted the eyes and filter caps brown. I put some Mod Podge around the tops of the filters. This was somewhat ill-advised. I just noticed that one of the pictures I was going off of, it looked like the filter kind of had like an old shinier surface that was sort of chipped away, and I liked that look, so I tried to do that with this, but it ended up just kind of making it look sort of plasticky. After that, I sealed it with some Mod Podge spray sealer, and then I put the foundation of some rust and weathering around the filters. And now it's finally time to attach the filters. I'm gonna use contact cement, but I am not going to wait for it to dry. I want some wiggle room, so I am going to stick them together while the contact cement is still wet. After that, it'll be time for some just kind of finishing touches, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. First, I want to get some more work done on the shotgun, so that they can hopefully be done around the same time. For the receiver section, I stippled some Mod Podge and silver all over it, trying to get a good texture going. Then I sanded the texture down partially just so that it looked less like stipples and more like slightly rough metal. After that, I did a dark wash. I sealed it, and then I brushed on some light gray with a really dry brush, just trying to bring out the highlights while also making it slightly less glossy. Then I moved on to the barrel. I wanted the barrel to be a lot shinier and smoother than the receiver, so in between each layer of diluted paint, I sealed it to try and build up more metallic tones and let them be see-through, hopefully. I did a light gray wash, then a darker bluish gray, then a really dark, kind of brownish gray, and I sealed that with some Mod Podge while it was still wet so that it kind of diluted. Then I did a final black wash that I kind of tried to really smudge into the cracks and crevices. I sealed that and then finally did a very light brush using some metallic silvers. And I think it looks pretty good. I'm still working on the muzzle a little bit, and I'll need to paint some things to give it some final touches, but I don't think I need to do any more masking. So I'm gonna go ahead and put on the pump and then take the tape off to look at it in all its glory. After painting it, that made it a lot stiffer, so it feels more genuine. It's not just like a little toy chick. It feels more like you have to go. Hopefully this won't tear off. It shouldn't, because this is the less sticky tape. Okay, yeah, let's see, is that? Okay, that may not be tearing off tape. Some of the dark wash of the barrel may have just seeped under the tape. May need to tweak that a little bit. Oh, that. Okay, gonna need to fix a spot on the wood here. Real wood has blemishes, so if there's a little yellow patch that I have to smooth over, it shouldn't be a terrible loss. No, don't make it worse. This wood wasn't, I guess it wasn't sealed very good. The tape peeled off there too. Or the tape peeled off the paint. Okay, but yeah, there's the gun. I'd say that looks pretty good. It doesn't have the shooting capacity or the trigger action, because I took the batteries out. My brother was sad about that. When I showed it to him, like, hey, look at the paint job. He was like, oh. But yeah, I'll put the batteries in when I'm all done, just to signal that it's finished. Before then, I need to finish the muzzle, paint the sights, and I haven't decided whether I want to paint this thing. I kind of like the black. I'll probably keep it. Looks good enough. Now I just need to add those touches, weather the gas mask, put the straps on it, and then these puppies are done. To fix the torn part of the paint, I put a little Mod Podge over it, then covered it in a diluted brown. I tried to smudge some black around the edges of the light spot to make it look like maybe it had sort of a ring of the grain around it, but it didn't turn out very clean. Then I sealed it with another layer of Mod Podge and dry brushed some lighter brown around the whole thing to try and hide the difference and cover up the sticky of the sealer. Then I gave it some bright red sights and painted part of the sight and the muzzle with a little bit more refined silver and dark wash. And since I decided to leave the recoil absorber black, I think it's done. For the gas mask, I did a black wash to try and bring out those little cracks and crevices. I don't know why I started talking all weird there, but that's what I did. And then I added some muddy brown. This did kind of cover up the black, but I still think it was beneficial to do both. And finally, for the finishing touches, I added a little bit of silver to the scratches that I had established previously, and I added some more dirt and rust around the filters and some of the rough spots. I'm not sure what exactly I was trying to go for with the dirt and rust. I mean, I know what I was trying to go for. I wanted it to look post-apocalyptic. Something doesn't look quite right about it, but I don't know whether if it's too heavy-handed or if I just didn't commit enough. I don't know. It looks good. Just didn't pop the way I was wanting it to. I went back and forth on some theoretical methods of how to add straps, but I decided to use those straps I got from my dad's desk. I think there was some sort of saddle strap. I'm not entirely sure. They're just thick leather strips. I poked holes in them and the bases that I put on the mask. Then I poked metal brads through them to hold them on. At first I thought I was gonna need to cover up the backside of the brads with something, either glue some foam on to give it some extra support, or at least duct tape so that the brad ends don't poke me. But wearing it, it actually doesn't feel that noticeable. Like, I thought I was gonna get poked by those things, and I don't feel them. So I measure out where the straps need to be. I need 2 that go around my head to meet in a clasp, and 2 that go over the top of my head that need to attach to those 2. I super glue the straps, but I also cover them in a little bit of duct tape, just mostly to hold them down while the super glue cures. But I may just leave them because, hey, it looks post-apocalyptic. I don't really need a strap on the bottom, since it's not a real gas mask. It doesn't need to be held really tight to my face, but I go ahead and put a strip of some old elastic on there, just to, mostly for looks, but also for some function. I can always change it if I need to. And finally, for the lenses. Originally I was going to glue them in, but since they are so darn tightly wedged in the sockets, and I was worried about how good the glue would turn out, I thought it would probably be a little messy if I tried hot glue, and I didn't know how exactly contact cement would work. Super glue is definitely not an option because it clouds up plastic. So I decided that I'm just gonna leave them there. I can always just glue them in later if having them loose causes a problem, but so far I think they'll be fine, because they are very tightly wedged in there. And that is that. I thought the apocalypse was going to be more interesting than this.
Sandy?